There are days when motivation feels like a distant weather pattern, unpredictable, unreliable, gone without warning. On those days, the world grows quiet with unfinished intentions, not because of laziness, not because of failure, but because something deeper is missing. Motivation is emotional. It rises when conditions feel right. Discipline is quieter. It does not ask how you feel, it asks who you are becoming. Many people confuse the two. They wait for a feeling to arrive before they move. They believe action must be preceded by desire. But the human mind does not always work that way. Often it is movement that creates meaning, not the other way around. This story is not about forcing yourself forward. It is about understanding the subtle psychological difference between wanting to change and learning how change actually happens.
There's a quiet moment that arrives without ceremony. It does not shout, it does not accuse, it simply appears, usually after another promise has been postponed, another plan left untouched. In that moment, something becomes clear. The desire was real, the intention was sincere, and yet the pattern repeated itself. This recognition is often misunderstood as failure, but it is not. It is awareness, a soft understanding that motivation alone has never been the missing piece. Motivation came before, bright, convincing, full of energy. It arrived in waves, carried by hope or inspiration, and then it left, just as quietly. What remains after it fades is more revealing. The empty space exposes what was never built. No structure, no rhythm, no internal agreement to continue when the feeling disappeared. This is where confusion settles in. The mind begins to question itself. Why does effort feel inconsistent? Why does desire feel unreliable? Recognition is not about judgment. It is about seeing clearly, seeing that waiting to feel ready has become a habit of its own, and habits, once seen, can no longer pretend to be accidents. This moment changes nothing immediately, but it changes how everything is understood.
Long before effort became a struggle, discipline was already being defined, quietly, indirectly, through observation. It was shaped in early moments when structure felt imposed rather than chosen, when consistency was linked to pressure instead of safety. For some, discipline arrived wrapped in control. For others, it barely arrived at all. The mind remembers these impressions even when the details are forgotten. It remembers whether routines felt supportive or restrictive, whether follow-through was praised or demanded, whether rest was allowed or only earned. Over time, these experiences form an invisible blueprint, one that influences how commitment is felt in the body. When discipline was associated with criticism, the nervous system learned to resist it. When boundaries were inconsistent, consistency itself became unfamiliar. Motivation, on the other hand, felt lighter. It asked for nothing long-term. It came with excitement, not expectation. So the brain learned a preference: chase the feeling, avoid the structure. Not out of defiance, but out of protection. What looks like procrastination in adulthood often began as adaptation in childhood. Understanding this origin softens the narrative. It replaces self-blame with context. Discipline was never missing because of weakness. It was misunderstood because of history. And what was learned quietly can be relearned the same way.
The human brain is not designed to rely on inspiration. It is designed to conserve energy, to repeat what is familiar, to automate what does not require constant decision. This is where discipline quietly lives, not in emotion, but in repetition. Motivation is driven by dopamine. It spikes when something feels new, meaningful, or rewarding. But dopamine was never meant to last. It rises, then fades, pushing the mind to seek the next emotional signal. This is why motivation feels powerful at the beginning and unreliable over time. It depends on stimulation. Discipline operates through a different system. It lives in the basal ganglia, where habits are formed and maintained. Once a behavior is repeated enough times, it no longer asks permission from emotion. It simply runs. This is not force, it is efficiency. The brain does not ask whether the action feels good. It asks whether it is familiar. And familiarity, not desire, is what creates consistency. This is why waiting to feel motivated often leads to delay. The brain is being asked to lead with emotion instead of structure. But when structure is in place, emotion becomes less necessary. Consistency is not about willpower. It is about reducing friction, about letting the brain do what it does best, repeat what it recognizes, and recognition over time becomes identity. Even with understanding, something still pushes back. A subtle tension arises at the thought of routine. A quiet voice suggests that discipline will shrink life, not support it. This resistance is rarely loud. It feels more like hesitation, like a heaviness before beginning. At its core, this resistance is emotional. Discipline is often misinterpreted as restriction, as the loss of spontaneity, freedom, or rest. The mind associates structure with obligation, not care. So it delays, it negotiates, it waits for a better moment. There is also an identity conflict. The version of the self that seeks comfort does not always align with the version that seeks growth. One wants ease, the other wants continuity. When these parts collide, avoidance becomes a compromise. The nervous system plays a role here too. Consistency asks for exposure, to effort, to discomfort, to the possibility of not feeling rewarded. For a system trained to seek immediate relief, this can feel unsafe. So resistance forms as protection, not sabotage. Understanding this changes the relationship with resistance. It is no longer an enemy. It is a signal, a reminder that discipline is not just behavioral, it is emotional. And emotions, when acknowledged, soften. The realization does not arrive with urgency. There is no dramatic shift, no sudden surge of clarity. It comes slowly, almost unnoticed, in the space between intention and action. A subtle understanding begins to form. Discipline was never meant to be a form of pressure. It was meant to be a form of care. This is where perception changes. Structure is no longer seen as something imposed from the outside, but something chosen from within, not to restrict life, but to hold it steady. Not to punish inconsistency, but to reduce chaos. The mind begins to recognize a pattern. On days when action happened without waiting for emotion, the outcome felt calmer, less internal negotiation, less self-criticism. There was a quiet relief in knowing what came next. Discipline, in this light, becomes protective. It protects time from being lost to indecision. It protects energy from being spent on repeated choices. It creates a predictable ground where effort can land safely. This realization does not demand change. It simply reframes meaning. Discipline is no longer the opposite of freedom. It becomes the container that makes freedom sustainable. And once meaning shifts, behavior no longer feels forced. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 6, Healing and Integration? Chapter 6, Healing and Integration. Integration happens quietly, through repetition that feels respectful rather than rigid. Discipline, once misunderstood, begins to soften into something familiar. It is no longer an external rule to obey, but an internal agreement to return. This return is not dramatic. It shows up in small, consistent acts that rebuild trust over time.
Each completed action sends a subtle signal to the nervous system. This is safe. This is manageable. Nothing is being taken away. Healing occurs when discipline aligns with identity, when showing up becomes less about proving something and more about maintaining continuity with oneself. There is less negotiation, not because resistance is gone, but because it has been heard. The mind begins to expect follow-through, not perfection, just presence, and expectation changes behavior. What once required effort now requires remembrance. Discipline in this state does not feel heavy, it feels grounding, like a rhythm the body can anticipate, a structure that allows emotion to rise and fall without disrupting movement. This is not control, it is cooperation between intention and action, between who you are and who you are becoming. And in that cooperation, consistency becomes natural. Time flows quietly, carrying both intention and inaction. Motivation rises like the tide, bright, sudden, and fleeting. But discipline is the shore it always returns to. It holds the moments that would otherwise scatter, the fragments of effort that might have been lost to hesitation. There is a gentle beauty in this realization. Life does not demand perfection. It does not ask for constant inspiration. It asks only for presence, for the subtle commitment to continue when feeling has waned, for the quiet courage to honor oneself through repetition. Discipline, seen this way, is not a burden. It is the silent architecture of living, the invisible scaffolding upon which dreams, habits, and identity are built. It does not scream, it does not demand, it simply persists, steady and patient. And so, when motivation fades, as it always will, there is no fear, there is only recognition. The work has already been laid, the pattern has already been traced. Motion continues, quietly, beautifully, without fanfare. In the stillness between intention and action, one discovers a profound truth. It is not desire that moves life forward. It is the consistent, gentle choice to show up again and again.